So Zuby is a musician, podcast, and author, and you have about 700,000 Twitter followers. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, 708. Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's getting close to a mil. And so what I find interesting about you, we followed each other like years ago back, and I just loved everything that you had to say, and you're so authentic, and you've created this cult. How do you think that sort of came to be, and how did that happen for you?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, everything I do started out with my music. So I actually studied computer science at Oxford University. Not everyone knows that about me. I'm a computer science grad, and I started making music in university too. So I released my first album when I was in my second year of 3. And then after I graduated, I worked in the corporate world for a couple of years while doing my music stuff on the side. And then in 2011, I took the plunge to go become a full-time musician. So I left that entire world and started selling my CDs on the street, and then eventually started doing pop-up shops all around the UK. I'm from the UK.
No accent there?
No accent. I grew up in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
I'm confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then over time, I built up my name primarily just through my music. And then 2018, 2019, started doing a little bit more social commentary, talking about things going on in the world and just sharing my perspective. And that started resonating with a lot of people, had a lot of viral posts globally. And that's what introduced me to people in the USA. So I caught the attention of people like ranging from Joe Rogan to Tucker Carlson. And they started talking about me and sharing some of my stuff. And that put me on a lot of people's radar. And then over the last few years, I started my podcast in 2019, wrote and released my first fitness book in 2019, and started doing more public speaking and things like this. So I'm at the intersection of a lot of different worlds, from hip hop to Bitcoin, which I've been into since 2017, to fitness, politics, social media, a big range of different things. But the key line through a lot of it is always about inspiring and trying to positively motivate other people. That's why I became a musician to begin with. And also to encourage people to be true to themselves, to be authentic. Because if you build your brand off authenticity from the very beginning, number one, you become very hard to cancel, which is important in this world. But you don't need to remember anything. You don't need to remember any lines, because you're always being true to yourself. And you'll also cultivate the audience that genuinely resonates with who you are and what you do. If you try to pretend to be something you're not, or pretend to be interested in things you're not, ultimately you may grow an audience that ends up resenting you, or you end up resenting your own audience. And that's something that's never talked about, but it's something that a lot of famous people, celebrities experience. They don't actually like and respect their own audiences. So there's this strange disconnection there because they haven't really been true to themselves.
That's so interesting, and I think that's totally accurate too. You put out a tweet, and the engagement instantly is right there, and they're supporting you. They're not, and who you are and your authenticity, but also, I really believe in this idea that when you are authentic to yourself, you basically silently give other people permission to do the same.
Absolutely.
And I feel like you do a great job of that. So in terms of Bitcoin, you got in 2017. How did you get involved?
Sure. So I first heard about Bitcoin many years before that. Unfortunately, I didn't do any research on it. So coming from a computer science background, and I remember probably I first heard the word, maybe like 2013, 2014, something like that. Yeah. But I didn't look into it. I thought it was just like a PayPal or like an in-game currency or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then in 2017, I'm not sure how it caught my attention. I think some of my friends handful of people I know on Facebook were talking about it a lot. And I was like, oh, let me look into this a little more. And actually, once I did some research, I was sold on the idea very quickly. And I was kind of kicking myself for not getting involved earlier. And then towards the end of 2017, of course, there was that massive rise in price in the bull market, and there was this point where it was going up by like thousands of dollars every day. And I did what a lot of people did and got like too hype. Was just like, okay, like this is the thing. Let me shove some money in there. And then got completely battered over the next few years, but I never sold anything.
Yes.
I kept going, right? I kept,
King.
yeah. I sold nothing. I was like, okay, let me keep buying this because the fundamentals haven't changed, and I kept doing research. So it was kind of this baptism by fire. I'm actually kind of glad I got in at a silly time and behaved in a stupid manner.
What price point?
Pardon?
What price point? Where did you buy like 3,000?
First buy was about 8,000, but then it hit 20K within weeks, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, cool, okay, it just goes up, number go up, right? So I was like, okay, so I think my biggest investment at the time was like January 2018.
Oh God.
And then I just got, And I was like, ooh, there's not just Bitcoin, there's all these other things, and they all go up.
Yeah.
So I was like, ooh, let's go crazy. And then, I'll be honest, I'll tell you, at the worst point, my portfolio was 76% down. Wow. Yeah, like sometime late 2018, 2019. But
you held true.
Held strong.
We love that.
So honestly, that's how I first got into it. And then over time, keep learning, keep researching, keep talking to people. I've done multiple podcasts on the subject, interviewed a lot of people in the Bitcoin space, read several books, and just been constantly learning. And then over time, you understand and appreciate at a much deeper level how important the technology is and what it could do for both the present and the future.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, because we're talking about social money and what that is and your brand, and that's valuable too. Your following is valuable, Bitcoin is valuable, and so I feel like there's a lot of comparisons in terms of like what Bitcoin represents and your brand, which is interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how we can get more creators, is sort of what I was talking about a little bit, to get into Bitcoin and identify Bitcoin with these key principles, because it's free speech in many ways, it's protest. And sometimes I worry that it is number go up, like conversation a lot of the time. And we're kind of seeing the same narratives. I mean, Bitcoin Twitter, like people get up at 6 a.m. every day before they've had a cup of coffee and they're railing out Bitcoin tweets. Like for 24/7, 365 days a year, there's that narrative going out there, which is kind of funny. Yeah. There's so much commentary, but back to like you and how you guys you and Bitcoin are almost very aligned. How do you think you get other creators involved in wanting to adopt Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a tricky one. I think it applies to creators, but I think it applies to people in general. And I think the truth with something about Bitcoin is the same thing that draws and attracts certain types of people to it is the same thing that puts some other people off. So in 2017, what got me into it is, when I looked and was like, all right, this is a digital currency that is not owned nor controlled by any government nor central bank, which is censorship resistant, which can be transacted across borders without the need for third parties, which is limited in supply and deflationary. I'm sold, right?
Yeah.
Other people, you tell them that, and they're like, what? It's not controlled by any government? It's not backed by anything, any military? You have to control your own custody? All of these things, like the notion of it being that form of protest or non-governmental entity scares a lot of people. It scares them away because over the decades, people have become so accustomed to the government, centralized entities, having to control
telling them what to do.
Everything, including the money supply. So while some people are drawn to this notion of it being outside of that realm, for someone who's very comfortable with things being within that realm, and for something to need to be in that realm, for it to be real and for it to be valid, it can be quite a hard sell and transition, I think. So I think the reality might be that just like on any technological adoption curve, you're going to have people getting involved at different times. And I think that just due to the nature of human beings, sometimes people need to see a lot of people doing something or getting involved in something in order to give it legitimacy for them. So you're always going to have the innovators and early adopters who, with any new technology, from the internet to video games to social media platforms to whatever it is, there's going to be a small number of people who are really intrigued by it. And then other people who are like, no, I'm sure when the car was invented, obviously people had their, horses and carts.
Yeah.
And we're like, what on earth is this disgusting, smoky, noisy machine? No one is ever going to use that. Like, this is a terrible invention.
Yeah.
And then someone else is there in their car, bumbling along and saying, yeah, this is going to be the future. Everyone's going to have one of these in the future. And they're like, nah, you're crazy. You're a conspiracy theorist, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then over time, it becomes normal. Same thing happened with every technology that's come out in our lifetime and everything. So I think adoption will drive adoption.
Yeah.
And I think each year, you've seen this happen because you've been in the space for multiple years. So there are people who in 2016 or 2017 were not interested at all, maybe even hostile towards it. And then maybe in 2019 or 2020, perspective shifted a little. 2022, that'll shift a little bit more adoption. And then there will come some type of tipping point where it becomes widely adopted. Exact same thing happened with the internet. Like I'm 35. I'm not super old, but I remember when the internet itself was a fad or stupid or pointless, very slow. Like, what's the point of using this? No one else is using it. You can't do anything useful on it.
Yeah.
And then very, very quickly, it became, now when the internet goes down, people don't even know what to do.
Yeah.
Right? People can't even fathom living without this thing.
Addiction, and people have withdrawals, yeah.
Yeah. So I think a time will come in the future. I think my little nieces and nephews, when they're my age, they're going to be using Bitcoin constantly. They might not even know that they're using it or know what it is, but they'll be using it.
Yeah, I think there is a mind shift. I tell a lot of people that are a little hesitant to Bitcoin. I'm like, your bank account is already operating on a ledger. They're not physically moving there's not a dude back there like, and now you've transferred 20,000 to this account, moving the cash. Like, you're already operating digitally. There's this mind shift, I almost feel like, that needs to happen. But I think this is interesting, talking about this conversation about like how long it takes for people to finally accept it, and like we kind of keep inching towards adoption and inching towards it, but we're not fully there yet. And so Elon Musk, you had on Twitter the other day, I saw two different takes actually. One was Elon saying that there's not enough people in the world, and then number two, he was saying that almost there needs to be, this is a little morbid for this conversation, but like the older generation basically needs to die off because they don't accept and they're not interested in changing their ways around it. I wonder what you think about those two things, because you did say you agreed that there's not enough people in the world. But I wonder what you think about, is it just hesitancy for people to not innovate or basically understand tech or want to use Bitcoin or use crypto? They kind of want to stay in the traditional mindset. And I also think that might be potentially generational. There's generational behaviors that have been ingrained in people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yes. First comment, totally on board with. Very, very pro-human. Second comment, I certainly would. I didn't hear that actually.
It was sort of in the thread, but it was like it's fine.
I certainly wouldn't word it that way.
Yeah.
I
don't know if he literally said die off, but he said that like each new generation he kind of said that, but it's like basically when innovation happens faster, sadly. And I don't know if that'll always be true, but
well, I think a lot of things are generational.
Yeah.
And people change, but there's in absolutely everything there's always a status quo and a common way of doing things. And due to perhaps it's just the plasticity of the brain and the open-mindedness with younger people, for better or for worse, it's easier for them in general to take on new ideas. I'm sure that when I'm 60 years old, I'm going to be far more resistant to whatever nonsense my children or maybe grandchildren at that time are trying to get me involved with. I don't know, it could be whatever new technology. I don't need that. Back in when I was your age, we were using this, right? It's kind of normal, it's standard. I think that's just the life cycle of humanity. So yeah, I would never we all die, we're all gonna die, but I don't want to like sort of talk about it in that way. But yeah, I think as time goes on, there's always going to be changes in the world. Some of them better, some of them worse. Change is not always good. Progress is not always in a good direction. But I believe that humanity is always simultaneously gaining and progressing in some areas whilst regressing in others. I don't think it's a perfect upwards trajectory. I think overall we're generally going upwards in terms of most good, decent things, but there's always the risk of backsliding as well. So it's a balance.
I have one more question for you, and then we'll take a few questions. Talking about regression, it just brings me to an interesting point, which I think we should talk about. It's cancel culture, and how you say, you feel very comfortable that you can't get canceled, or that, that's something that your audience would not do to you, or whatever. Just in a similar way, you can't cancel Bitcoin. Why do you think that is? And do you think we're going to have a regression of cancel culture? I feel like it's already happening in some ways, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think more and more people are comfortable pushing back against it now. I want to say it peaked. I think it probably peaked about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm now starting to visibly see and audibly hear more and more people being willing to. I remember in 2017, people were terrified. A lot of people were just terrified to say anything that was outside of this very, very narrow window. And there were quite a few high-profile incidents of people being canceled or, deplatformed, censored. These are also mean slightly different things, by the way. There were a lot of high-profile incidents, and I think it's peaked, and the pendulum is going to start swinging back the other way. I believe right now we live in the age of overcorrection in many, many aspects. So I think that's good, because while it's important for people to be accountable for their words and actions and to be responsible, we don't want to have this very harsh, unforgiving, headhunting type mentality in our societies, in our countries, which doesn't help anyone, and it's ill-spirited. It's not something positive and coming from a good place. Yeah. So I do think it hasn't regressed enough yet, but I think it's going to take that active pushback, and all it needs is for everybody to be 10% or 20% courageous. I sometimes tell people, because I get asked about this a lot, actually. Yeah. A lot of people confide a lot of things in me all around the world. And a lot of people are living in this kind of constant fear and chill and self-censorship. And I often say, all it needs is for each person to be 10% or 20% more bold and courageous. Yeah. Not everyone needs to go full Zuby. But if they can just be that little bit more, you see something wrong, or you have an opinion which differs from the narrative and you're hesitant about whether to say it, it's like, just say it, right? And then you'll quickly find that it's not as bad as what you imagined in your head. And sure, some people might push back against you or disagree or even insult you, but that's not the end of the world. Don't put yourself at risk of physical harm. Yeah. But you'll find that, I'm sure you've had people send mean things to you online before. Of course. But you're here, you're alive, you're happy, you're healthy. So it's not the worst thing.
I've lived, I've survived. Oh my gosh, very inspiring. I loved everything you had to say, and I think it just really resonates with this community. We have 1 minute and 30 seconds. If anyone, I don't know if we do have time for a question, but if anyone has an immediate question for Zuby, feel free to raise your hand. I think we do have a mic. Oh, Jess has the mic? Okay, and can pass that around if anyone does. We have a question over here.
Good morning, and thank you. Do you have a methodology that you use on a daily basis, or how do you basically come up with your strategy of keeping your word out and what you say? It seems like you're a pretty methodical person, so do you wake up at 5:01 and you have to do something at 5:02? Can you walk us through your daily routine?
Yeah, it's disappointingly unstrategic. I have a really hyperactive mind. I'm a creative person, I'm a musician, and I'm always traveling and observing things. And so if I have a thought which which I think is interesting, or which I'm mulling over, or just an interesting observation, I tend to just share it. And so that's my process. It's not really planned. It's just, oh, I saw, heard, felt something interesting. If I think it's interesting, so will other people. So let me put that out there, and it generates conversation and engagement.
And then we had one more.
Sure, one more?
If we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, thank you for your work, Zuby. Big follow on Twitter, love you. We mentioned yesterday there's a lot of introverts and stuff in the crypto community, and you're obviously, a very confident guy. Is there anything you can do when you're on Twitter and you're getting that vitriol and all that thrown at you? Is there any way you can stay based as somebody that's a little bit less confident or maybe a little bit more introverted? Get some advice you can give for something like that, please?
Absolutely, man. The first thing I'd say is you always have the power to log off. Right? And that's, yeah, you don't have to consume it all, right? If you say something or something happens and all of a sudden there's a bunch of people gunning at you, and I've experienced this at least over 100 times at this point, then you don't have to entertain it. You can just ignore it. If it's something that's a reasonable criticism or something that maybe you said that you didn't mean or whatever, then you can always address it. But if it's just people angry and initiating this kind of pile-on, then you can just stay away from it. And also you can recognize that oftentimes people are just projecting stuff, right? So they're not really mad at you. They're upset, they're angry, something's got them riled up, and you just happen to be the person of the day that they've seen, and maybe something has been shared by someone else, and it initiates this type of mob mentality. So it's not really saying anything about you oftentimes, it's just saying something about where they are in their own mind. So if you can keep that in mind and actually kind of just be compassionate and be like, okay, it sucks that you are that angry, but it's not really my fault nor problem.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we have last question. Any more questions? All right. Thank you so much, Zuby. It was such a joy to have this conversation with you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Where can we find you? Is it just @Zuby? What is it? What's the handle?
@Zuby Music.
If you're not following already, I mean, you have to. So thank you so much.
Thank you.